Seems smaller somehow.
Has it always been purple?
Friends was never simply a television program. It was a shared experience that defined an entire generation of viewers, a consistent presence in millions of homes, and for many, a reflection of their own lives unfolding in real time. From its debut in 1994 to its final episode in 2004, the show created a world that felt familiar, comforting, and remarkably real. It told the story of 6 friends navigating adulthood in New York City, but what made it extraordinary was not just the humor or the writing, it was the emotional connection that audiences developed with its characters. For 10 seasons, viewers watched Rachel, Ross, Monica, Chandler, Joey, and Phoebe grow, struggle, succeed, and evolve. And because of that, when the show came to an end, it did not feel like the conclusion of a television series. It felt like saying goodbye to people who had been part of everyday life. To understand why the final moments of Friends carried such weight, it is important to look at how it all began. When the show first premiered, television comedy was dominated by traditional formats centered around family households or workplace dynamics. Friends introduced something different. It focused on young adults in a transitional stage of life, a time filled with uncertainty, ambition, relationships, and self-discovery. This shift allowed the show to resonate deeply with audiences who were experiencing similar challenges. The characters were not perfect. They made mistakes, faced failures, and often struggled to find direction. But that authenticity became the foundation of the show's success. Rachel Green entered this story as someone leaving behind a privileged but unfulfilling life, determined to find independence. Monica Geller was driven by a desire for control and perfection, shaped by years of feeling overlooked. Phoebe Buffay brought an unpredictable, unconventional perspective, yet carried a depth rooted in her difficult past. Ross Geller was intellectual and sensitive, but often overwhelmed by his own emotional complexities. Chandler Bing masked his insecurities with humor, using sarcasm as a defense mechanism. Joey Tribbiani approached life with optimism and simplicity, valuing loyalty above all else. Individually, they were compelling. Together, they created a dynamic that felt natural and believable. The environments they occupied were modest. Central Perk, the coffee shop where they gathered, became more than just a location. It was a symbol of connection and familiarity. Monica's apartment, with its distinctive layout and welcoming atmosphere, served as the central hub of their lives. These spaces were not extravagant, but they became iconic because of what they represented. They were places where conversations unfolded, relationships developed, and life happened. Viewers did not just observe these moments, they felt included in them. As the show progressed, its popularity grew rapidly. By the late 1990s, Friends had become one of the most watched and discussed programs on television. Its influence extended beyond entertainment. It shaped fashion trends, introduced phrases that became part of everyday language, and redefined how audiences viewed friendship. The appeal of the show crossed cultural and geographic boundaries, making it a global phenomenon. What made this success particularly significant was that it was not driven by spectacle or controversy, but by relatability and emotional honesty. Over time, however, the characters began to change, reflecting the natural progression of life. Rachel evolved from someone dependent on others into a confident, independent professional. Monica found stability through her career and relationships, eventually building the life she had always envisioned. Ross faced repeated challenges in love, struggling to reconcile his desires with reality. Chandler underwent one of the most significant transformations, learning to confront his fears and embrace vulnerability. Joey continued to pursue his ambitions, maintaining his optimism despite setbacks. Phoebe found a sense of peace and belonging, balancing her eccentric nature with emotional depth. This evolution was essential to the show's longevity, but it also introduced a subtle shift. The carefree nature of the early seasons began to give way to more complex storylines. The characters were no longer simply navigating young adulthood. They were facing long-term commitments, career decisions, and life changes that altered the dynamic of the group. While this added depth, it also marked the beginning of an inevitable transition. The world of Friends was no longer static. It was moving forward, just as the audience was. Behind the scenes, the cast developed a strong bond that contributed to the authenticity of their performances. Their chemistry was not manufactured. It was the result of years of collaboration and mutual support. They negotiated contracts together, ensuring equal pay, which was a rare and significant achievement in television at the time. This unity strengthened the show, allowing it to maintain consistency even as it grew in scale and complexity. By the early 2000s, the question of how long the show should continue became increasingly relevant. Despite its ongoing success, there was a growing awareness that the story had reached a natural conclusion. Continuing beyond that point risked diminishing its impact. The creators and cast made a deliberate decision to end the series while it was still at its peak, preserving its legacy rather than allowing it to decline. The final season was approached with a sense of purpose. Every storyline was carefully crafted to provide closure. The relationships that had defined the series were given resolution. The characters were prepared for new chapters in their lives, even if those chapters would unfold beyond the screen. This approach ensured that the ending would feel complete rather than abrupt or unfinished. When the final episode aired in 2004, it was watched by tens of millions of viewers. The anticipation was immense, but the execution was remarkably understated. Instead of relying on dramatic twists or unexpected developments, the episode focused on the theme that had always been central to the show: change. Monica and Chandler prepared to leave the apartment that had been the heart of the series, moving into a new home that represented the next stage of their lives. Rachel faced a decision that would take her in a different direction. Ross confronted his feelings in a way that brought resolution to one of the show's longest-running storylines. As the episode progressed, the tone became increasingly reflective. The characters were still themselves, but there was a noticeable shift in their interactions. The humor remained, but it was accompanied by a sense of finality. The audience understood that these were the last moments they would spend with these characters in this context. That awareness gave even the simplest scenes a deeper emotional impact. Then came the moment that defined the ending. The apartment, once filled with energy and activity, stood empty. The furniture was gone, the walls were bare, and the space that had once been so full of life was now silent. This visual contrast was powerful. It highlighted the passage of time and the inevitability of change. The characters stood together, taking in the emptiness, fully aware of what it represented. In that moment, there was no need for elaborate dialogue. The absence of noise spoke volumes. The suggestion to go for coffee one last time carried a significance that extended beyond its simplicity. It was a final attempt to hold onto something familiar, even as it slipped away. When they placed their keys on the counter, it was a symbolic gesture, marking the end of an era. Each key represented years of shared experiences, and leaving them behind signified acceptance. As they walked out of the apartment together, the camera lingered, allowing the scene to unfold naturally. There was no rush, no attempt to soften the impact. The silence, the stillness, and the absence of the characters in a space that had once defined them created a moment that resonated deeply with viewers. It was not dramatic in the traditional sense, but it was profoundly emotional. This was the scene that ended Friends forever, not because it was shocking or controversial, but because it captured the essence of what the show had always been about. It was a reflection of life's transitions, the inevitability of change, and the importance of the connections we form along the way. It acknowledged that while friendships may evolve and circumstances may change, the impact of those relationships remains. After the series concluded, its presence did not fade. The show continued to be watched by new generations, finding relevance in a rapidly changing media landscape. Its themes remained universal, its humor accessible, and its characters relatable. The world of Friends did not disappear. It became part of a broader cultural memory. The enduring appeal of the show lies in its ability to balance humor with authenticity. It captured a specific moment in time while addressing experiences that are timeless. The final scene did not diminish what came before it. Instead, it gave it greater meaning. It reminded viewers that endings are a natural part of any story, and that their significance lies in what they represent. In the years since its conclusion, Friends has remained a reference point for discussions about television, storytelling, and cultural impact. Its influence can be seen in countless shows that followed, many of which attempted to replicate its formula. Few, however, have achieved the same level of connection with audiences. The reason is simple. Friends was not just a product of its time, it was a reflection of it. It captured the uncertainties, aspirations, and relationships that defined a generation. And in doing so, it created something that extended beyond entertainment. The final scene serves as a reminder of that achievement. It encapsulates the journey of the characters and the emotional investment of the audience. It is a moment of closure, but also one of reflection. It allows viewers to consider not just the story that has ended, but the experiences they have shared with it. Ultimately, the ending of Friends was not about loss. It was about transition. It acknowledged that while the circumstances may change, the connections remain. The friendships that defined the show did not disappear. They simply moved into a different phase, one that exists beyond the boundaries of the screen. And that is why, even years later, the final scene continues to resonate. It is not remembered because of what was said, but because of what was felt. It is a moment that captures the essence of the show, and in doing so, ensures that its impact endures. In the end, Friends was never just about 6 people living in New York. It was about the relationships that shape us, the experiences that define us, and the moments that stay with us long after they have passed. And in that final, quiet scene, all of those elements came together, creating an ending that was both inevitable and unforgettable. That is why it still matters. And that is why, for so many, that single moment truly marked the end of Friends forever.